So let's talk about the different listening styles that we all may engage in from time to time. All right, so there's four different types, so let's go through all of them. There is the action-oriented listener, and this person is the person that wants to hear things, but they want to maybe give advice or take some sort of action. So they want to know why you're telling them this information and what is maybe going to happen from that information. So is it that I'm action-oriented listening and I'm trying to figure out a time for us to get together? Am I being action oriented and I want to give advice to solve the problem? Now, this is where a lot of people get into some trouble because some people just want to be heard, and some people are being action oriented listeners and they end up giving advice, and the person's not either ready for the advice or that's not what they were seeking by telling you the information. So, this is something to be wary of if you're an action oriented listener. But sometimes it's also really good to be an action oriented listener. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily help if people just hear, I hear you, I understand. Sometimes people want a response or for you to go with what they're saying and be able to complete an action after they've told you maybe how to do something. So if you're being action oriented, you may be more able to comprehend how to do stuff based on just listening to people. So some things to think about for if you're an action oriented listener. There's also time oriented listeners. So these people tend to enjoy more straightforward conversations, what happened, don't spend a lot of time with unnecessary dialogue. And so this is something that you want to think about is how time oriented is your listening. Also, this tends to take place a lot in group projects. There's maybe somebody that's very time oriented in a group that'll be like, hey, this is due next week, or hey, we only have 20 minutes to do this. We have 20 minutes to meet up. So let's try to get all these things accomplished in this time frame. Now, time oriented listeners, as we're thinking about different cultural elements in other sections of the class, you might also be thinking about, hey, does this fit into this polychronic, monochronic kind of time orientation as well? And it tends to. So, people that are more monochronic are also more time oriented listeners. So, you might also think about that and how that influences your communication and also your communication across cultures. So, thinking about that. Again, it may be really positive that you're able to get things done in a time oriented manner, that you're not going to run over schedule too much, but it also can be a little bit discerning for people that maybe are more polychronic or aren't as time oriented or concerned with time, that they may feel like they're being rushed in order just to make time schedule. Do you even care what I'm talking about or just how long I'm talking about it? So this is something to just be aware of on both ends. All right, there's also people-oriented listeners. So this is where people want to know that they're making a connection with you through talking to you. And so their listening style is all about making that connection, making empathetic remarks. So I might be saying stuff like, I understand. Oh, how did you feel in that situation? And so being more feeling oriented or people oriented means that you might also be concerned more with what they were going through in order to empathize, how they were feeling so that you can empathize better. And so this can be really positive because people may feel really connected to you. Hey, they understand what I was going through. In certain situations, it can be really hard to actually stay on task if people are just being people oriented and trying to get to know each other better. So, in a group project, you might think about this as when somebody is trying to get to know everybody in the group, make sure that everybody feels their voice is heard, everybody feels like they understand where that person's coming from. That can be really good, but it can also take much more time. And these two different styles, maybe the time oriented listener and the people oriented listener, may combat because they're spending a lot of time on unnecessary things or things that won't further the project to get it done in time. So that may be something to think about. All right, and the last one is the content-oriented listener. Now, this one is trying to understand all the different perspectives and the content of the information. So, this person may ask a lot of the details in your story. This person may actually do a little bit more of that probing, clarification kind of discussion orientation. And so when you're thinking about this content orientation, it can be really good for getting every bit of information down. When you're thinking about certain professions, you need to actually recall very specific information. And other professions or other times, maybe that content is actually unnecessary and taking up more time or stopping a person from fully telling their story. So, again, that's why we tend to say that you should paraphrase at the end of when people are finished talking rather than interrupting, maybe to paraphrase what they're saying. With content oriented people, there's a lot more clarification or kind of conversations that happened. And there's a lot of more of this kind of, hey, what was the time? What was the date? What was the place? So those kind of Q&A kind of sessions happen with more content oriented listeners. So good or bad, who's to say for the different orientations, but I want you to think about what kind of listener are you and how can it switch from situation to situation?